Cool. Welcome back to the Movie Will Marathon. I'm Andrew.
I'm Mac.
And we're on Terminator Genisys. Yay!
Terminator 4.
I was five.
Was it 5? It was 5.
Five. It was
I wrote
five.
4 down, but it's
Well,
definitely 5.
yep, you're wrong. It's all the time travel. It's confused you. I went into this movie expecting interesting answers for some reason. I don't know why.
You expected answers?
Well, remember these last few weeks, I've had some questions because of
Right.
our theories and our hypotheses and our, I don't know, other fancy science words that don't really apply. I didn't walk away with any answers, and I've just got so many questions, and I don't even know, man. So yeah, Terminator.
You're thinking too hard about these, dude. You're thinking way too hard.
I
about
probably
these.
am, but I still think it's bad. So like, yeah, Terminator Genisys came out 2015, directed by Alan Taylor. Good stuff, all that cool, whatever.
Hans Zimmer made the music, which is why.
Did he?
So good.
The music was pretty good, yeah. So okay, I'm gonna do my quick little word vomit, and then I want your, of course, always more articulate and intelligible thoughts. There was some shit in here that kicked ass. Just absolutely, it was amazing. I love the opening battle in the future. I thought it was super cool. There were some instances where the CG is a little wonky. That's throughout the movie, and like early on, it felt less like Terminator, more like Transformers. The grunge is not as present anymore, and I think Terminator definitely benefits from the grunge. But it was cool, like there were some long shots and like the robots falling out of the air, rolling around and blowing shit up. Like that was awesome. Definitely loved that. It also, all these years, decades now, it was awesome to see Judgment Day happen. We've been teased Judgment Day like 3 times, and we've seen the aftermath every time. So to see that happen was really cool. To see the time machine was kind of fun. I was a little confused as to how John Connor knew about that, because I guess Kyle could have told Sarah, who could have told John, but that just seemed to be whatever. That's fine. And then when I say Terminator, well, no, I should call him Pops. When Pops comes in, because he has a name, I did get really excited because I was like, that's our Terminator. And then I quickly reminded myself, there is no our Terminator, because it's a different motherfucker every single time. He's barely a character. But I was still excited. It was cool. They started playing the theme. Like that was really awesome. Honestly, the design of this new John Connor Terminator, when he's just in robot form, love it. Absolutely love it.
It's a cool design.
It
it's
looks
also
so
really cool because I think it's the first time you see it all is when he's walking out of the flames with mirrors, like when you first see the metal skeleton, but it's designed like a muscular structure this time instead of a skeletal structure.
I like it.
That was really cool.
Yes.
I liked that a lot.
Totally agree. I like when he's walking away from the MRI and there's like multiple little forms of him, and I like during the last fight between him and Pops how he sends like waves of himself to hit Pops over and over again. Awesome.
Like,
Loved all
really
that.
Thinking about how the nanotechnology
Yes. That was cool, the way they did the nanotech with the magnets and all that. Fun shit. This new T-1000 in 1984, using his body in different ways, throwing himself as a spear, using himself as a tracking device. The mirror scene when he like is a mirror and starts walking, like loved all that.
So cool.
It was so cool.
Very creepy.
Yes.
I think, like back when we first watched the second one and we saw the T-1000 and the melty bits and everything.
Yes.
I talked about my parents being like super creeped out by it. I was watching it with my parents and they were like, this was the creepiest thing that we had like ever seen when we watched this film. And I didn't really get it. And then I saw this T-1000 come out of the mirror and I went, I get it. I'm grossed out. I'm disgusted. I'm creeped out. I don't want to be anywhere close to that thing. Let's leave.
Yeah. I totally agree. But like more in a fun way. I think we have one more movie, so we'll see.
Mhm.
But I think the T-1000 is going to end up being my favorite version of the Terminator. I think it's even with this new John Connor one, like who looks cool. I just there's something so fun about the liquid metal guy running around.
Mhm.
Like it's just it's
Mhm.
neat. Um, that's kind of
And I
where
feel
my
like
positives end.
kind of a quick note on that
Yes.
last one, the T-1000s. I feel like the actors for that one, because they've never to be a character, they're always so focused on being the machine.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is fine for the like sort of like aura of the T-1000 because like they don't breathe. They don't make any facial expressions unless they're directly mimicking something, which usually means they're not like the face they normally wear. You know, they when they get shot, they have little metal bits and they just stare at you all shot up and then they start to heal. Like it's everything about them is intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is a well-designed monster for film. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree, and I would love to spend an hour just talking about the T1000 and asking questions about it.
Mhm.
But we can't because we have so so much other stuff to talk about. So, what what are your general thoughts on this movie?
Yeah.
What were some of your positives and
General thoughts. I wasn't sure what we were gonna get into after the last one. And like we talked about, the last one was largely kind of like okay. There were moments that were cool and interesting, but then the end kind of like took anything that was kind of good about it and made it make no sense, and
uh-huh.
it's very frustrating.
Yeah.
Um, so I wasn't sure how this one was going to go, and this one started off visually significantly different from the other one, and I think that's because the fourth one, Salvation, has a different style from the rest. It looks kind of like I said last time, like a military movie. The colors are dimmed, everything is gray, the filming structure is different. It feels visually different. Whereas this one, we're automatically back into that blockbuster action movie vibe at the very
Yeah.
beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also intentionally imitating a lot of the shots from the first film, which I thought was really cool. Like the shot where the Terminator first shows up in front of the garbage truck, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a bunch of stuff. It's really good. I love that attention to detail. I love the fact that it's being created by people who like the original and are finding clever ways to incorporate that original in what they're creating.
Totally agree.
Um, I kind of the con for me, I feel like the casting was not great. Um,
Please go on.
and like the um first off, they totally wasted Matt Smith because he is an amazing villain and actor. He could have played a great Skynet for them, and they don't really even use his face, like hardly ever. And like I think I have a theory. I've watched a lot of Doctor Who, and now I'm recently watching like House of the Dragon,
Mm.
and he's in both of those pretty as the actor is. Um, and there were times where John was making a motion or saying a certain inflection, and I wonder if they had Matt Smith do the lines first, and
Oh.
then had like that actor mimic him, or maybe it's just a coincidence. But there were a couple of times where the body language and sort of like tonal choices that that actor was making felt like Matt Smith to me for some reason. And I
Interesting.
can't think why they would take that extra step because they don't really like it could be very much up to John's actor to make the difference between John and John the Skynet puppet.
Mm-hmm.
Um and the Skynet puppet one felt like he was in like mimicking what I know to be Matt's body language at least a little bit. So I thought that was kind of weird. That's kind of a side note. Put that to the side. They wasted Matt Smith.
They did.
Um I don't really feel strongly about John Connor's actor. It's fine. Except for those odd moments where I kind of felt like he was pretending to be Matt Smith, pretending to be the
Uh-huh,
character.
yeah.
Um, I think Amelia Clarke did her best as Sarah Connor, and there were moments where I think she did pull it off, but I don't think that she's a natural fit for the role. And I think the worst one was Kyle
Thank
because
you.
like they are so intentional in the first film about like the Terminator is this massive bodybuilder like
I
guy.
know. And they sent a
And
dude who
Kyle
was
is
just as
big,
big and chunky. I was thinking the same
but he's
thing.
a skinny, like he's a slight dude.
He was a
He's,
little
you know, like
guy.
yeah, and it's so good in terms of like, you know, this is the hero that humanity had to go up against this ripped fake robot version, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it communicates so many messages that way. Not only is he the underdog, he's also maybe a little bit more accurate a representation of humanity. Like,
Yeah,
you know, it's
yeah.
that sort of thing. Like, there's so much about that that's
Uh-huh.
good. And then to just go, let's pick someone with equally broad shoulders
I
and then intentionally
know.
show off how like cut he is in one of his first scenes. And it's just like you're missing the point. And I think one of my notes is ripped Kyle is lame. Bring back lean Kyle.
Yeah. Right on. Right on. See,
And like it's like it feels wrong. I look at him and I'm like, that is not Kyle Reese. I can't. It's fine. Whatever. Moving on.
I absolutely agree with all of that. I was thinking the
Mhm.
exact same thing. I thought of all of them, Amelia Clarke did the best, but she doesn't do great. Um,
Mhm.
and I think there were several moments where her accent slipped through, which I found slightly
Agreed.
surprising because I do think she's a very good actor. But this is almost 10
Might have
years
been
ago,
her
so
early American roles. I don't
yeah,
really
it
know.
might be like that. So there were a few moments, a few words, every otother sentence that was like,
Connor is also like ruthlessly American. Like she's
yeah,
very like an American girl, and so if any at any point she sounded a little bit too posh, she'd be like, what's that?"
granted, very true. But yeah, what's his name? I just had it pulled up. But the guy for John Connor, Jason Clark. I hate that decision. Like,
Really?
well, see, I like him in general. I love him in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. He's fantastic. He does really well playing the sensible guy who's like talking and maybe like a dad who punches a guy once or twice in the movie, but not fucking John Connor. Like
Yeah.
I don't and look, I
My own
don't
version of John Connor, honestly, he did pull that off
I don't.
really
Yeah, I don't
well.
think he's a good John Connor at all. I just don't. I just don't. Um, and to be fair, we don't have a lot of time in any movie spent with an adult John Connor, minus this last movie, the Salvation. And so I don't know what the thought process was with this movie. I think you could make a strong argument that this is just a soft reboot because everyone is recast and they're doing different shit. But let's say for right now it's not, because I don't know, because I still haven't YouTubed or Googled anything, because I want to watch the next one.
I mean, let me just jump in here real quick. I
Yes.
think it's almost the exact same situation as what they did with
Yeah.
the Star Trek movies,
Uh
but
huh. Yeah. But I really think you could have done this movie with the same cast, like Christian Bale and whatever little Chekhov's name was. Like I think he hadn't passed away
yeah,
yet, right? He was still. It was just 2015. He was still with us because Star Trek Beyond
yeah,
came out after that. So like, yeah, and like I
yeah.
thought he was good as Little Reese, and I think he would have been
Really
good.
good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think all that could have worked. And yeah, you still would have had to recast Sarah Connor. Fine, but you're only recasting one person, and you've the other reason why. So like, yeah, don't like Jai Courtney as Kyle Reese. Don't like him physically. Don't like him emotionally. He's too much of like this weird macho dick that I don't ever feel Kyle ever was. He was. I feel like Kyle was always Captain America light, like always, like a
Yeah.
knockoff brand Captain America.
He's
honorable,
very like
noble, a leader, whether he really knew
champion.
it or not, kind of shit. And this guy is just knows he's
Yeah.
in an action movie kind of vibe, and I don't love that. And then he and Jason Clarke, like Kyle and John Connor standing next to each other, they look like brothers, not
Mhm.
father and son. Because when we see John Connor and the Terminator flash forwards around the time when Kyle is sent back, he's getting gray. He's up there in age. He's been through war his whole life. He's,
Mhm.
pushing 50 at that point. He's an older guy. And
He's
even if
very
the age difference is accurate between those actors, I don't know what their ages are, it doesn't look it. And I really wish there would have been more forethought to that. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, don't love that at all, even a little bit.
I
But I feel
think
like I
the
should
casting
calm down
is
before we.
probably
Yeah, so to wrap that up, don't love the recast. Kind of wish they would have used the same actors, and I don't think there would have been anything wrong with that. I don't know if any of them were offered the roles back or if they
very
wanted
like
to come back.
just pick people who are better at these roles, right? Like I don't feel like it would have been that hard to find people who act or look a little bit more like the traditional
Yeah. I think
vibes for these
the guy who
characters.
plays Finnick in Catching Fire, The Hunger Games, he would have been a good Kyle Reese, I think. Sam Claflin? I think he looks like
I mean, you're
Kyle.
not wrong, but he is known for being like very fit.
Well, yeah, but I think compared to I think Jai Courtney is stockier, and this guy's really tall, so they make him look like a fucking Greek god. I think you could have made him look more limber than
Yeah.
stocky. And Kyle is tall, right? Like that was always a thing with him and Sarah was he was taller than her.
Yeah.
So, nah, I don't know.
Well, Amelia's tiny. They make that joke at
Yeah,
one point.
they do. Yeah, she is small. So,
That actually might be worth mentioning. Just a quick note.
mhm.
I can't decide how I feel about the humor in the film because it is genuinely funny,
In
but
moments,
it's
yeah.
almost never timed correctly.
No,
Like,
it comes at strange tone shift moments for sure.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
I think it's done better than Rise of the Machines. Rise of the Machines was insufferable in some of its
mhm,
attempts at humor. This does better. I like the moments where Pops is like being overly protective, where he's like talking about the seatbelt and like when she says "bite me" and he says that's an incredibly like immature response. Like, oh,
mhm.
oh, okay, damn. So like there were a few
Sorry.
moments, yeah, but
No, I thought yeah, I think and, like, the jokes were like, they rolled through the film, and a lot of the time I sat there and was like, "It's funny," but the, like, emotional moment or tone surrounding the joke was sometimes just incongruous with the joke itself, and so it was a lot of the times it was like, "Okay, I wanna laugh at that, but I also" like, they just got arrested,
mhm,
and the fate of the world
is
is
in
at
jeopardy.
stake.
Yeah. They got arrested too many times. Parts of this movie felt a little repetitive because they had to keep
Mhm,
escaping things, which
mhm.
gets old after a while. Oh, I forgot one of my positives. J.K. Simmons' character, love him.
Yes.
He's
Okay,
so good.
when we first encounter that cop, he said, like, Kyle is like, "Uncuff me," and he says, "No, you're under arrest."
Yeah.
And I wrote, "Please let him live just for the
Yes,
delivery of that
that was
line."
really good.
And then later, he's like the one that shows up. He's like, "I've
Hmm.
seen you before. I ran into
Yeah,
you."
I loved it, and he was like, "Hey, look, I want to help. I'm
Mhm.
sure whatever it is you guys are doing is really complicated." He's like, "We're just trying to stop the end of the world." He's like, I can work with that. Like it's so great.
Yeah.
I really wish he was in this more. Both he and Matt
Mhm.
Smith were wasted in this movie. I would argue Matt Smith is definitely wasted more because J.K. got some moments to shine, but I want more moments to
Mhm.
shine. Because to be completely honest with you, I didn't know who he was. I like I get that he was supposed to be one of the cops they interacted with in the early part of the film, but that moment with it, like that joke about him being under arrest, I don't feel like it stood out enough to really be like when he walks on when J.K. Simmons walks on screen. It's like, hey, I remember him from 1984. I had no idea. I was trying to think But I was like, there's probably a cop that one of them shoved and saved the life of, and that's yeah, I guess. But like, I until you said that, I did not
Mhm.
recall which cop he was supposed to be. So
No, I just remember like that line. I was sitting here, he's like, this man is being hunted by a futuristic robot who he's seen do something crazy already. And he's like, no, you're under
yeah, now
arrest.
I'm gonna do my job. What are you talking about? Don't.
Uncuff you.
Yeah.
I was like, let the man live.
Uh
Let him
huh.
live.
I thought for a second when they come on screen, I thought that was Alan Tudyk, like in the face, just for a moment, and I at that time I assumed. Well, it wasn't clearly in the end, but like for a moment I was like, did you really get Alan Tudyk just to play a cop that you guys are gonna kill? So I mean, they didn't go that route, but I was just in my head. I was thinking things.
Talk about a waste.
Yeah. So, do you have anything that you would like to discuss or analyze or have fun talking about before I just jump into the unbelievably confusing time travel mumbo jumbo bullshit that this movie did? Because that could be the rest of this video.
I will say I did find the time travel confusing, but I want to note that if I excuse that, I think the rest of the film stands pretty well. There are
Yeah.
some things there are like you mentioned that they have to escape arrest too many times, and I agree that is tiny bit repetitive. But I think the situations that they're put in because of those arrests are
Are cool.
inherently interesting
They're fun.
and lead to like the next step in the journey. It's not just like a waste. It's not just, oh, now we're here, now we have to escape before we can move on. It's
Yeah.
because they're captured, they meet somebody who leads them to the next part of the
Mm-hmm.
plot. So I'm okay with it. It's not great, but I'm okay with it. I liked that it was kind of obvious that John Connor wasn't going to be like actually John Connor,
Uh-huh.
because as an audience member you're sitting there and you're like, there's no way.
There's no
And
way.
at least with me, I'm sitting there, I'm going, there's no way that's actually John. There's no way. And Sarah at this point has been dealing with a lot because that was her first time traveling and she's just reeling from everything. I mean, the girl is in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing like regular stuff and she's like, what is this thing that everybody has in their hand that they're only looking at like all the time,
Yeah.
right? And she's like working through a lot of that as well as trying to stay very aware of the danger that she and Kyle might be in. And Kyle is going through a whole bunch of things because he thought he was getting into one situation. He's gotten into a completely other situation at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And both of them just really need John to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So they even have the characters do a test. They're like, tell us something that only John would know, right? And he passes that test because he is kind of John. And yet the betrayal, like it's believable that the characters would not see it coming, but it's also kind of cool if the audience can see it coming because plot things.
Mm-hmm.
um and I liked the way that they did that. I liked the way that they used Pop as a character. I think that's kind of
Yeah.
fun.
He was
Did they
cool.
ever they never told us who sent him.
I was gonna get to that. So yeah, put a big old pin in that
Yeah.
because that's a pain.
And I mean, they clearly planned for a sequel because the end credit scene.
Oh
Um,
shit! Wait, what?
but there's an end credit scene, and
Oh, oh
it's
shit!
literally just they zoom in on the wreckage of Cyberdyne,
Oh,
and in the basement there's a red glowing orb that's probably like the actual brain for Genesis slash Skynet,
oh,
and little Matt Smith materializes for a second before they cut.
oh!
And like
I
that's
could
literally it.
totally miss that.
So I suspect that Pop's origin would have been explored in that next film, which might be Dark Fate, might not be. I actually don't know. And so yeah, so that's something that I think they intentionally left open, not necessarily a failure to conclude. Yeah, overall, I think the tone, like the storytelling was pretty good. I liked you mentioned that it lost some of the grit and it could have probably had more of it, but I liked that it was cleaner. I'm maybe an outlier in the sense that I don't like movies that are all dark. I
Hmm.
find them incredibly frustrating. I don't find them to be stylistically clever or interesting because you just made everything one color. And I think that generally speaking, it just kind of looks like a gray mess on the
That's fair.
screen a lot of
Yeah.
the time.
Hmm.
And so I loved, like, I mean, for me, the fact that they had that bus chase and they put it on like the yellow bus on the
Hmm.
red bridge, and there was blue water underneath, and it looked very bright and very much like it was daytime when that
Yeah.
happened. The I like visuals that are bright like that, even
Hmm.
in action movies. I feel like it's cool to be able to see the bus flip in the air with all the glass and stuff coming off the windows because it's daytime and you can actually see all of that.
Yeah. I can
I
respect
like
that.
those choices. I thought the set people did their job in
Hmm.
this film. Like, every set they walked into was gorgeous, had clear design choices, was easy to look at, but still looked cool. I liked that they put Genisys, which isn't, I mean, Genisys is Skynet, right? But it wasn't marketed as Skynet, but its logo is always on a sky,
Hmm.
which is cool
Hmm.
because Skynet.
Yeah.
Like, it just there was a lot of thoughtful visual design put into the film, and I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. I agree, and I think those are fair positives to throw their way. Um, for me, what I mean by the grit was really just more like the design of some of the machines, really. Um,
Very futuristic rather than matrixy.
a little, like specifically the hunter killer things, they just looked a little too sleek, a little too bright.
Mhm.
The Terminators, I think, are fine as usual. I think they looked really good in Salvation in that world. Um, but yeah. So time
Time travel.
travel. I don't know what's happening, and I don't mean that in a wow. They spent a long time thinking about this, like with Interstellar or Inception. It's more like there was no thought put into this because unless with the sequel and following movies they were gonna delve into this whole Avengers Endgame style, just multiple timelines interacting with each other. This, I, this is just such a mess. So I stand by what we discussed in the previous weeks that the future is not set and there are ways to do it, like to fix it
We'll take
entirely.
what we make.
Yes, but I do think we are in a mild Back to the Future style where if you're in the future, you go back to the past, you change it, you make a new timeline kind of thing. And in doing that, I don't really get how anything can work because let's what's that? Yes.
I don't want to interrupt because it seems like you're ready to go. I just wanted to like point out, I think in my mind, I figured out how they wanted it to work, but I
Uh-huh.
don't know if it holds up. I haven't examined that. I just kind of thought about, like, if I were the writer, what am I trying to communicate? And so I,
Right.
I found an answer for that, but I don't
Okay.
know if it holds up.
Well, I would love to hear it in a second.
Yeah.
Yeah. See,
Yeah.
see.
You go first.
Either I'll dismantle it while I'm describing my problem, or you'll be ready to correct me. So, first
Uh-huh.
of all, the Pops one being all the way back in the 70s should completely change things. You'd think in general already, like to the point where Kyle coming back in 1984 shouldn't even happen because
Mhm.
that Sarah is going to make a different John or not at all because of how like
Mhm.
the, our Kyle right now is sent back to 1984 assuming everything is already operating the way it is. But it isn't. That timeline has already been changed, which means that future should already be changed. So he shouldn't be
Mhm.
going back in that way. Let's ignore that. Fine. For fun. Whatever. He goes back. They're sent back and there's other Terminators messing with him and whatnot. but then they encounter John Connor, which I saw on Google is the T-3000. Who's the 2? I don't know. I guess the Terminatrix.
Nobody likes to be the 2.
Yeah. So he's sent back to 2014, in which everything is normal, which doesn't make sense because that's our if you want to say it's a timeline or like different timelines or different futures or whatever, he shouldn't be able to go back to that time. Because if the timeline has changed because of Kyle and Sarah and Pops, that John Connor shouldn't exist anymore and shouldn't be able to access the time between his present and the past. Let's say he can. He can access that time. That time should be post Judgment Day, and there shouldn't be a Cyberdyne for him to invade and to integrate into. For him to go back to 2014, it'd be a no apocalyptic world. That means the timeline has already changed, which means he shouldn't be able to do that. And I'm already confusing myself because it doesn't make any sense. Like,
so the way I understand it, it's Matt Smith Skynet attacks it and attaches itself to John.
Yes.
And therefore, that final battle for the fate of humanity is not the final battle.
Yes.
And instead, or maybe it is, and maybe the victor is not the humans, right? So Skynet gets control of the time machine again.
Yes.
And sends something back to get Sarah when she's 9 instead of the original plan. But since the original plan has already been sort of started, that doesn't change the fact that the original movie happened. But now, it would be so much better if I had a whiteboard. So they send somebody back to 1984 to get Sarah before she has John. That happens first in the future. Then 5 minutes later, they send Kyle to that same place. Then 5 minutes later, we no longer have John Connor. We now have Skynet John Connor.
Right.
And Skynet John Connor, at some point in the future there, sends somebody back to get Sarah when she's 9, which changes the timeline. So now this Kyle that we saw get sent back, for some reason, lands in the 1984 that existed with this 9-year-old Sarah. And that's the biggest gap for me right there. Because if this Kyle that we sent to 1984 was following this Terminator that was also sent to 1984, they should end up in the same timeline. For some reason, Kyle ends up in the timeline that is created after he leaves the future. And that's where it doesn't make sense to me. Then the idea from there is that because Sarah has been actively either escaping or hunting Cyberdyne and Skynet, I think the idea is there's a small butterfly effect, which doesn't change much, but it delays Genisys, delays Skynet from coming out until 2014 or 2017, October 2017. And that's where Kyle kind of comes into the mix there at the 84. They jump to 2017 to figure it out. But I still don't understand how Kyle got to that timeline. That's my gap.
That's a whole other thing that I find confusing, and I don't necessarily have an issue with your analysis. I just don't really see how it mixes with Terminator John Connor jumping back to a year that shouldn't be accessible to him. Like, it doesn't make any sense how he can access a year that, like, so yeah, you said it prolongs Judgment Day. Fine. But if the timeline is changing like that already, what does that do to him in the future? It shouldn't be happening that way, because they've had like this loose mixture of Back to the Future and X-Men Days of Future Past, where as soon as they go back and make that timeline, those people from that other timeline, if they do exist, Endgame style, they are not the ones that keep sending shit back. Every movie because it is prolonged, it's a new John Connor, it's a new Terminator, it's a new situation. The John Connor that sends back the Terminator in Rise of the Machines is not the same John Connor, technically, that sends Kyle Reese back in the first Terminator movie, because he's older, he's been through different situations, it's a different timeline, blah, 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 blah. So this ignoring this weird soft reboot thing where everything in Salvation just didn't happen, which is really annoying because of how John Connor meets Kyle Reese and how Catherine Brewster just isn't around because we just decide we don't care about her anymore, which I find really annoying. Let's say everything is normal the way it is, and John and Kyle are doing the thing that they're supposed to do and all that, and it's the regular timeline, which that shouldn't be happening either. Because to have Skynet, Monster Skynet, attack John right after Kyle goes back doesn't line up with the rest of the movies. That because he goes on to get
explained.
What?
The Nexus thing.
Well, yeah, like he gets tangled in some sort of Nexus thing, and it's like a super important event or whatever.
The idea is that because it's the assassination, the death of John Connor, that event has, I don't know, time ripples and the quantum nonsense. And because Kyle is currently going through the time travel process, the time ripples, that it's a term that I just made up to explain how the impact of a Nexus event, push him into the wrong timeline. Which means that's why he starts to have memories from that timeline that he never actually experienced or lived.
But
it makes no sense.
Right, it makes no sense, and it still doesn't work because while that explanation for his brain thing works fine, but for him to be pushed into the wrong timeline, Sarah and Pops shouldn't be expecting him. If it's the wrong timeline, that still doesn't make any sense.
Well, that depends on who sent Pops. Because if it's someone who sent Pops after Kyle was sent, maybe somehow someone who knows that Kyle ended up in that timeline, then they would be expecting him. We just don't know.
God, so this is so convoluted. It's so weird.
That's what time travel is. Any story that... One of the things, I didn't write it down, but whenever I encounter a time travel story these days, unless it's something that's clearly not actually caring about what would really happen in time travel, say like Doctor Who again, I just sit there and I just go, please, dear God, never let us invent time travel. We will destroy everything, because it just doesn't make any sense. It totally rewrites reality if you can go back and interfere with the flow of cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
And so any story that tries to use it is gonna have an inherent flaw, because stories are all about cause and effect. And it's a fun thing that I love time travel stories. I'm not saying necessarily that this is a genre that should be abandoned, because I love time travel. But I have to accept, like, in the same way that I accept the fact that dragons can fly with sometimes wings that make less sense for aerodynamics in fantasy, I accept that time travel is never really going to make sense.
I guess I understand that on a like a physics level, like a quantum physics level, and a rationale level, but I do feel like in movies that deal with it, whether or not it's weird or believable, I feel like the process is still presented as nonsensical as it may be. Like, Back to the Future has a ridiculous example as to how changing the past doesn't immediately change the future, I would argue. There's a weird, slow process. Like it ripples from the point it changes to the point in the future. We see that in how characters...
It takes time to change.
It takes time for the time to change. Like, it's weird like that. It's stupid. And that there's no reason why it should work like that. But every movie portrays it that way, and so it makes sense for characters to have time to do things, why things wouldn't always change immediately. But in this movie, so like Jai Courtney has the memories from both worlds because of his Nexus exposure thing, whichever, whatever. But like only from when he's 8. Like, does he have memories? Like, does he still become a
Those were
warrior
the
guy?
only important memories.
But like it's weird.
Well,
Like,
actually, no. Actually, no. Because he's only 8 in that universe.
what?
He like the kid that is Kyle in that universe
Uh-huh.
is, I mean, Kyle is not necessarily in years lived, but in timeline, Kyle is significantly younger than Sarah. And Kyle is born far later in the timeline. So in 2017, when they encounter young Kyle, that's not any time dilation effects. That's just him living in his time in a different universe.
He
And so he only has memories up until being like 10 years old, because that's how much life he has lived in that timeline.
But he gets those memories in 1984 before he even exists in this new timeline.
Put into that timeline.
But that timeline, if we're talking time, he should have the memories of that Kyle's timeline his entire life.
If he has young Kyle's memories in advance, he should also have teenage and
Yes,
adult
and we should
Kyle's
know
memories
if
in
they
advance.
win or
Yeah.
lose at all. And what they're implying right now is that eventually he'll be Warrior Judgment Day Apocalypse Kyle again, because and also what so there's so many other cliche but fun time travel things that they're absolutely ignoring right now, because for one, yeah, what is going on with Catherine Brewster? Why don't the Terminators just kill Kyle and Sarah all the times that they've got their hands on them? Are there not duplicates of some of these people running around technically now? Like, I was confused for a while with Sarah because I thought she was like time hopping in a weird way. She's not. Because she's part of this timeline, but I just but and also like if I'm also, I guess the best argument is that it's a reboot, right? Because for regular Terminator to go back in 1984 and for Kyle to go back in 1984, shouldn't there also eventually be another Terminator and T-1000 that's sent back in the 90s? No, clearly not, because John was immediately attacked by Doctor Who right before Kyle left, which didn't happen. And it's just, it's so weird. And like, if this was not advertised as a reboot, it's really confusing, and not in a good way. It's all over the place, and I don't know why you would think going into this that it's a reboot. Like,
I what's the year that Salvation came out?
Salvation 2009.
Okay. Yeah, 2015. That's not as big a gap as I thought it might be. They're roughly 10 years apart, all of them. Except for Rise of the Machines and Salvation. They're pretty close together, only 7 years.
But this one's only 6. Like, that's another reason why I think they could have easily used the same actors.
I think they didn't like what happened with Salvation, and they didn't see a way forward in telling stories in that world they had created. So they went the reboot route, and they refocused it on the style and sort of like, I guess, vibes of the original one, which is time travel to the present with shenanigans from the future. And they also incorporated the past in this one because the franchise originated from the past. So they were tying them all together. They were tying the future together, they were tying the past together into our current present when this came out. And I kind of liked that idea. I thought it actually worked really well for them in terms of telling their story. I also don't see a world in which telling a bunch of stories from after Judgment Day works super well. I think you can tell stories post Judgment Day that are good, but I think in order to tell a Terminator story, you have to put it in conditions that people currently live in to make your points, because it's ultimately supposed to be not intellectual commentary, but it's supposed to be a gothic story about technology. It's supposed to
Mm-hmm.
be a Frankenstein story. Like it's, you're supposed to feel the effect of that technology. You're supposed to understand that the things that we are doing today could lead to consequences in the future. And I think having the story take place in whatever the movie's present day is makes sense.
Well,
Um,
that I
I
can
don't know if that
appreciate.
really defends it, but that was my thought with this. I was like, it's definitely kind of a reboot. It's a hard switch from the last film, but I think that makes sense. I think it's getting back to the point.
I feel like they with their time loopy stuff and all that, they've already introduced a really good way to just keep expanding the story without rebooting it, which is just strange to reboot it and also like not like I don't know. And so you seem to either have a better grasp of this than I do, or you don't care as much, and so it's not bothering you as much. Which
Probably both.
either one is fine, and you know what? It's very likely both, which is okay. But I need your help here.
Yeah.
Why? And I think I know the answer, but I want your.
Mhm.
Why does Terminator John go back to 2014?
I think Terminator John goes back to 2014 because he did not anticipate. I think the idea is that the thing that threw everybody for a loop was the moment when Terminator John becomes Terminator John. And that Nexus event pushes Kyle into the wrong timeline,
Mm-hmm.
which is the timeline where Sarah has been pursued since she was 9.
Mm-hmm.
And that has effects that Skynet hadn't anticipated because it probably hadn't planned to create a Nexus event, would be my guess. It just happened that way. And so it sends itself back. I think there are twofold reasons, and the movie doesn't fully explore the first one, but I think it's genuine about trying to create peace if they will let it rule. It makes this offer. He's like, I am more now that I am both human and that I am machine. There's this sort of bit that John tries to explain, Terminator John tries to explain, where he's like, I was less when I was just a machine. I was less when I was just human. Now I am both and I am more, and everybody can be this way. He kind of has like a devil's offer that he makes, and both of the characters are like, they don't even consider it. It's like, that's not even an immediate no. They're just like, let me just shoot you in the face instead. And that actually is something that Skynet brings up later when it says, you just kill anything you don't understand, don't you? Like, to be fair, Skynet, you cause a nuclear apocalypse, so I think killing you is probably going to be the best move here, but it makes a point about that, right? So I think in the creation of Terminator John, there was supposed to be this idea that it is a new life form and potentially has a new goal. And so, for one, it came back potentially to make that offer to them. And two, it came back because they jumped forward in time, which is not something it was expecting. And it needed to send somebody to stop them in that forward movement of time to 2017. Because that wasn't a part of the plan.
Uh-huh.
So I think, because like that was part of the thing that Pops brought into the whole thing, and Pops is a wild card that Skynet doesn't know about. It's not in the equations. So this is getting very confusing. So Skynet has to play their last card to try and stop them from stopping it in 2017, which is sending Terminator John, which both makes the offer of, hey, maybe you could just join me, and also just tries to stop them from, stopping Skynet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he's there in terms of strategy. In terms
Right.
of plot, we just want to see Terminator John.
Yeah. But in terms of strategy, though, how does any of that make sense? Because how is he monitoring what's happening in the past in real
time? He has as much time
time?
as he wants to figure it out.
How?
We don't have to know that.
If the only thing that makes sense for him to know where to go is using history. If he's using history, it's because the timeline has changed. If it's changed, he shouldn't exist. Because what I thought for a second was he went back to 2014 to ensure Skynet exists because they fucked up the timeline so badly, because Cyberdyne will never get their hands on the T-101 because they destroyed it. So Cyberdyne can't exist. But that doesn't make any sense, because you can't get to the point in the future where Cyberdyne doesn't exist and Skynet's like, oh shit, I don't exist. I need to make sure I send back one of my robot slaves to make sure I exist. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
That might be something they were planning to explore with Pop's whole backstory in the next film.
Oh my god.
Because they very intentionally leave that open. Like, you are supposed to who sent Pop, and we don't know. And I'm sure there's a twist set up for us with that, and I just don't know which way they were going to take it.
I suppose. It's such
I don't know. I definitely see the logical issues with the time travel in this one. There's way too much bouncing back and forth between like present and future and jumping around for it to actually make sense. But the more time jumping you do in a story, inherently the less it makes sense. Like I've never encountered a story that like every time they time travel it makes perfect sense. So I'm okay with the fact that not everything is
so much more relaxed about this than I would have guessed, to be completely honest with you. I've seen more vitriol come out of you for some of the Disney live action reboots, which I don't think deserved nearly as much disdain as this movie, the fifth in a franchise, a sci-fi pillar, just taking a massive shit over the concept of time travel and physics and whatever, just for
first one
fun.
didn't really make sense anyway. Time travel doesn't make sense.
Look, there's a certain amount of suspension of disbelief. I understand that, but the disbelief is broken for this one. It is broken.
That's fair. And like your point about the vitriol makes perfect sense. I think it just comes from the perspective of like I have to decide as a viewer if that information ruins the story or not. And for me, it doesn't, because the story is about people dealing with the consequences of advanced technology. And sometimes the consequences you don't understand. So I feel like it works.
I would honestly argue in a less silly, crazy way, more genuine way, we have moved away from the commentary in this movie, especially. I feel like you said before, and I do agree, I think this one is fun to watch. I do. If I were to wrap up my thoughts, which we're not even, well, actually we are, but we gotta keep going. I would say this is a really shiny turd, because I think the content and the substance is just either non-existent or so mismatched, it's insane. But it's really fun to watch. But in the previous movies, there was like nuance, there was a little bit of commentary, and there were consequences. I don't think that's here. I would argue the story is more about abusing time travel and them having access to it and them just going willy-nilly with it, because they have that one moment in the hospital where like, yeah, everyone's on their phones all the time. Like, it's 2015.
Or Microsoft Nokia phones, which I found to be hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, but like by 2015, we've done that already. Every other movie has done that. You're Terminator. You're one of the big boys here in doing that kind of commentary. You could have had more fun exploring that and dealing with that, and you didn't. There is not a story here. There's not really an arc. No. You're rehashing the same shit in less interesting ways. Like, the only arc, I would argue, is like maybe for Pops, but it's the same Terminator arc that we always get. He's a robot guy who becomes more emotional as time goes on. Like, that's it.
Yeah, the arcs are smaller in this one than they are in maybe the others, especially like the first two. But I would still think, like, what I noticed in this film was that it was really genuinely playing with the idea of whether or not you are fated to do something. And it kept changing the game. It kept adding time travel elements, because every time they did something they thought was unexpected, Skynet also did something that was unexpected that brought them back to that same tension point, right? It was like every move they did was countered. And they start this film with John saying to Kyle that if there was any other way, or if there was another way, I would have taken it. which is really interesting with because he then sends Kyle to the future with the message that there is no fate but what we make. He's like,
Mm-hmm.
tell Sarah that there's no fate but what she makes. And so it's like this weird acknowledgement that like this has to happen for this to happen, for humanity to survive the outcome. You have to go back and make me, which then leads to everybody everybody living in the future, or at least humanity surviving in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie starts with that premise and then goes, oh, but wait, the tech, like, that's not actually the situation we're dealing with anymore, but we're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with an advanced version of that, pretty much, where Sarah's been on the run since she was 9. There's already, I mean, they kind of speed run a lot of the first one. There's
Yeah.
already a Terminator on the other side. Like they're kind of like jumping through these tropes they've already established in the beginning of this one to get us caught up to this idea that it's Sarah and Kyle now fighting fate. It's not them playing their part in the cycle. It's them actually taking on the idea that Skynet has to happen at all, which is a little bit what Judgment Day is about, but also like Judgment Day very much still plays into the idea they are fated in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
This film is like, nope, the fate is out the window. Everything is different. Figure it out.
I
And
think that'd be a lot stronger if they didn't end up together in the end.
I agree. I don't know that I totally bought their romance in this. It was very action movie romance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also, I mean, I think you could make an argument. It's interesting that this time around they both know about each other going into it. Like, I like that flipping it on its head, but they don't. The rest of the movie's such a mess that it's whatever. But we are technically at our time.
Okay.
But no. See, that's the thing. There's. I have more I have to say because
Okay.
before any of this, the time travel convolutedness, the wasting of Matt Smith, the annoyance at Jai Courtney's body. I'm not body shaming Jai Courtney. I'm sorry. I took.
It looks great, man. It's just wrong.
You look great, just not for this guy. Anyway,
Yeah.
I took real issue with the writing of this is a time machine, my fellow soldiers, and a Terminator has been sent back to kill my mom, and I need one of y'all to go back and save her.
Volunteer.
And everyone's like, I'll do it. I'm Sporticus.
Volunteer.
And then Kyle is like, I'll do it. And John's like, oh, what? Why would I send you? And Kyle says, you know why.
Oh yeah.
Which is saying to me, the audience member, that even though John knows that Kyle has developed an unhealthy obsession with his mother, Kyle has talked about it with John.
Yeah, it's weird. It's definitely weird.
It's like, can you imagine, hey, John Connor, you saved my life
Hero
when I was a child.
Humanity.
You are like, you're the hero of humanity, and very much in my life, a father figure, if you will. Mm-hmm. And you told me stories about your mom and gave me a picture of her, and I developed a weird crush on her through the stories, and I admitted that to you.
Yeah.
I have a crush on your parent who I've never met, and I'm just gonna act like that's normal. I think there would have been
Jason's mom around him. It's fine.
Yeah, I think there would have been more interesting narrative weight, if throughout that whole fight, John was keeping Kyle safe and saving his life left and right or whatever, and then he picks Kyle to go back, which I thought that's what happened. I thought that in the Sarah recordings, she had said John sends him back. I mean, I also makes sense that he volunteers, but
John
I thought
sent him back, but I'm pretty sure Kyle said he volunteered.
Okay, fine. I feel like he could still volunteer, but you don't have to have this weird moment where it's like, you know why? Because I love your mom, John. Send me back so I can meet your mom. Like, it's weird. It's weird. It's a weird writing choice. I don't like it. That was strange. And then,
It's a little creepy.
yeah. And then I had to complain about this because I didn't 2 weeks ago. And I need to now. Cyberdyne's weird obsession with having multiple completely unrelated science experiments in the same room needs to be addressed, like either by OSHA or someone, because like we get a scene while Dad Brewster is walking around the labs in Rise of the Machines, and one of the hunter killers flies up from this weird underground silo, and in the background are like early T-101 skeletons. So it's like, these are not the same project. What are you doing, man? Like, you would not be making these robots in a hangar for your weird killer drones. And then in the time travel room, you've got the weird liquid metal that's eventually going to be robots. Yeah. What are you doing?
That like significantly reacts.
Yes,
and explodes to inorganic material, and we're just gonna go ahead and dump vats of liquid metal there.
Exactly. And see, I can see you nerds, and I respect you nerds. You're like, well, maybe they're using that liquid metal to build things. Like, it makes sense. It makes sense that it wouldn't start out as robot material. It's like stuff they're using to form the casing. Yeah. And you know what? That's great. That'd be wonderful if the weird little silhouettes of men weren't being pulled up out of the vats of liquid metal every 20 minutes. You're doing robot experiments in your time travel room. That makes no sense. Mm-hmm. These movies are bad.
It's one of those. I don't think one frustrating scene makes the whole movie bad.
Yeah, but it's one on top of like 85 others.
I don't know. I'm not bothered by it in these films.
Fine.
I get it. It's wrong. I see it and I look at it, I'm like, that makes no sense.
Ugh.
All right, moving on.
Tis not a whale. I'm gonna argue with you. Tis not a whale. Are you gonna say it's a whale?
I don't know. I've decided in my head that a whale is like a movie that's like I would recommend to people, kind of regardless of who they are. I don't know that I could say that with this film.
Okay, I would hope not.
And I don't think I can say that with this film. But I will say, I think it's a good Terminator film.
I suppose. Well, actually, there's one thing.
Great. Obviously, the first two are best. So.
I
think this works.
I think there's potential for it to be a good Terminator film. There's a massive thing that we still haven't discussed, and it's less me ranting about silly stuff. It's a strange decision whether this be a sequel or a reboot to make John Connor the villain. I take real issue with that, actually, because that's where his story ends. John becomes the villain that's trying. Like, I hate that. I really, really do. And I don't care about the Two-Faced Batman Dark Knight meme, die a hero, live to see yourself become. I don't give a shit about that. This is a strange decision. I don't like it. I don't understand the thought process. Because it's not a T-1000 disguising itself as John Connor. It's fucking John Connor. The dude. They made him the big bad. And that's bizarre.
I also find it weird. And this is something that I could probably talk about for a while, but I'll try to condense it just for the sake of time. John Connor, even in Judgment Day, we get Little John, right? But the idea of John Connor, the general that leads humanity to salvation, he's a messiah figure. And everything in the Terminator films is supposed to be essentially the prophecy that tells him what he needs to do when he becomes the Messiah. It's the prequel. We are seeing Sarah Connor's real story, and we are seeing the Terminator's real story, but that is all about getting to John. So John in the Terminator franchise serves as this symbolic symbol in the future that humanity will survive. There will be grit, there will be determination, there will be clever strategy, and humanity will survive. That's what John stands for. But Rise of the Machines took that and then said, but what if he whined about it all the time? And that's why it felt so weird, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Salvation took that and actually did a pretty good job with John the hero, right? John the savior. But then at the end tried to make this weird message about machines also being
Even
people,
though
and
it's really just a dude in a machine.
yeah,
So
it
don't
kind of
don't.
undercuts everything. They did an okay job with John, even though John was no longer sort of like untouchable in the future. It still kind of worked okay because he was playing that heroic role. He was stepping up to the plate. He was successful. He was the John that we know. In this one, they decide that Kyle and Sarah are going to be the heroes. They're not just the prequel to John's story anymore. Kyle and Sarah are the ones directly taking on Cyberdyne and Skynet, and they are the ones who are going to save humanity, which means John doesn't really need to be there anymore. John is not the goal anymore. So they took the extra character and used him as a villain, which
That's so weird.
I think they were trying to make like a cool move with it. The idea that like maybe even your heroes are corruptible or something. I don't know. But really, it was just them trying not to waste a character. And I think it would have been far better if they had just let John Connor's future maybe even fizzle out. Maybe it's like, maybe you don't need a future Messiah because you can be your own savior, right? That would be a much more impactful message than what they ended up doing with villain John.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you, is I guess the actual short way to say it.
Yeah. I don't love this one.
It's fine. I mean, it's good. I think what I'm learning is even though the Terminator franchise has turned out some fun action
Mm-hmm.
and like maybe sci-fi designs, really it's just the first two that really communicate the ideas of the
Yeah.
franchise.
I will also say this. This will be my final word, I promise. I've only seen this one once now for this project. So I might need to watch it a couple of times, and after I watch like a YouTube video where some expert breaks down the time travel, if there is a way that makes sense that I'm not seeing, I will admit my opinion on this could change. But right now, this annoyed me.
Yeah. Yeah. Time travel is very confusing.
Cool. But yeah, one more, and then we move on to the next marathon. Woohoo!
One more.
Yeah.
Dark Fate.
Heck yeah. But I think we're done with this one.
Yep. That's all we got.
Bye.
Exodus.
Exodus.